there are fewer and fewer people that are truly educated. I always think that, when I'm reading something, it takes me days to read a book. And during that period of time, even while I'm ingesting it, I'm wrestling with these ideas, and then I'm thinking about the ideas when I put the book down, and it is a deeper knowledge than you're going to get Googling a fact or reading an article. The exercise of forming cogent thoughts, I think, is really important to learning how to think. And I worry that, as you're talking about some of these complex ideas, you're really talking about the foundation of our society. How do you get that across to people that maybe don't want to put in work?
Let's go.
Welcome to Citizen. We have a special guest today, Nick Palmisciano. You all know him, so we're going to keep the intros brief.
Yeah, we don't have to. We don't have to do all that.
This is also your second time on the show.
I appreciate you having me again.
Yeah. Well, you just happen to be in. We actually are crossing paths more regularly now.
Well, you're becoming more of a force in getting stuff done.
Yeah, it's it's been an interesting transition for me. Most of my life, I grew up poor, and then I was in the infantry, so I'm used to having busted knuckles all the time.
Yep.
And this whole thing where most of my influence is picking up phones and pressuring people into doing things, or just knowing how to maneuver pieces around, is very foreign to me, and it's irritating as well. Not the I don't mind doing it. That's not the point. It's like at the end of the day, I have clean hands, and that seems very odd to me.
Yep. I
don't know how to process any of that, to be honest. It feels like, I talk to Sarah about this all the time. I feel like I'm not doing anything anymore.
Oh, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, it's a different world, and it's a really frustrating world. And I don't excel at it. So many of the people in the DC world are very transactional. And the idea, not that there aren't good ones, because there are plenty of good ones, but the idea of just doing something because this is obviously the right thing to do is not common. It's usually, well, can I blow this off? There's a calculus of what do I get from doing this versus what are the risks from doing this, which I have to imagine you hate.
I understand it. Because that's the way I do business, right? Okay. But that's not the way I do help. And I think it's inappropriate, to be honest. Now, as a middleman, it's definitely part of the package, to when you're, we'll call it messaging, but it's really just a conversation. But when you're messaging for somebody to provide something to you, you got to know what motivates them. But I mean, that's just frankly, that's good leadership in the first place, to know what motivates your men. You should always know that. Not everybody's motivated the same way. If you it isn't about right or wrong, it's about being effective, I think. So there might be some dumbass from South Georgia, and I need to yell at him because that's how he fucking communicates. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And there might be some fucking college kid from Illinois, and he's never been yelled at before, but they can both be high performers if you treat them the right way. If you
give them the right inputs. Yeah.
So it's like that. We talk about this in football a lot, and it's true of other sports as well, but I think football especially is true because just how the game is played. But a good coach will be somebody like De Beers, who went from Washington to Alabama this year, or there's others like him as well, but I think he's a good example because he's got a very specific style of play. Heupel's like this at Tennessee. There's a couple other college coaches that are like this. They play a very specific style of football, and they do a good job of recruiting people to work inside of their scheme. But a great coach can make anything work. Right? You give me any roster and I'll make it work. And I'm talking about Andy Reid, who's at the Chiefs now, but he was also
he's
great
an
with the Eagles.
amazing coach.
And then Belichick are the only two I've ever really seen do that.
Yep.
I guess Tomlin in Pittsburgh to some degree is like that.
I
he
think
makes
so.
the best of a lot of bad situations, but it's still the same general game plan all the time. But a great coach is somebody who looks at the talent pool he has and devises a strategy around them. And that's, as a small team leader, that's your main job in life. Like as a platoon leader a little bit, as a company commander less so, but as a squad or team leader, that's like the top of the pyramid leadership wise, in my opinion, right?
Yeah,
aside from just leading by example, that's the first thing, but the actual direct leadership component, I think that's it. It's assessing this strengths and weaknesses of your team and then making that move, right? Figuring out a way to make that move.
For sure.
Now when you're dealing with business, I think it's pretty much exactly the same. And then, if you map that on to the stuff that we're talking about, which is, pressuring people to do certain things or whatever, it's like, okay, I know company X is going through it right now. They might need some good press, so I can play that card or whatever, right? I mean, it's I don't think of it as being manipulative. I'm trying to make them feel good about what they're doing.
Yeah, I think that's a totally reasonable situation. But when you're talking about crisis, when you're talking about Western North Carolina, when you're talking about and people are kind of thinking about things the same way when they have assets to give, I feel very differently about it. Like
sure.
Business is, business has to be, a win both directions or it's bad business.
Yeah. Yeah, it has to be. And then, a good example is waste management, right? Mm-hmm. So Chelsea from 107, they're rebuilding these people's business.
Yep.
And, Andy gives him some money, and then he finds out I'm involved, and he just pays for all the rest of it. Andy Vasella from First Form, because he's like, oh, if I'd known you were involved, I would have paid for the whole thing. I'm like, well, next time just pay for the whole thing anyways, because you can, you know what I mean? No, he always does shit like that. He's one of the most generous people I know. But
well, also he probably looked at it and said, okay, if you're involved, I know it's legitimate.
That's part of it. Yeah, it's third-party validation for sure. Yeah. And then Waste Management, who I don't know in any way. I don't know any of these people, but I got hooked up through Justice Berger. You know Phil Berger?
Yeah, sure do.
He's a good man.
He's great.
He hooked me up with some people that hooked me up with their PR team, the Southeast PR director. Mm-hmm. And it got confusing for a moment because the contact was like, are you guys paying for this, or are you looking for a donation or whatever? I'm like, no, we can pay for it. We got funding and all that shit. Waste Management gets on the phone and they're like, hey, we want to help. We don't really service that area, but we'll send some stuff out there. I'm like, all right, cool. And it was their general manager for all of Western North Carolina personally drove the fucking dump trucks out there.
Wow.
Within an hour, right? So I'm like, all right, cool. Like, I don't know how to respond to that aside from just like, that's the right, because that's what I would do. That's the right thing to do, right? But as you alluded to in the beginning, corporate people aren't always like that, right? Like it's something for a multi-billion-dollar company to send their guy in the region outside of his region to go help somebody, right? I mean, I don't think that's common, frankly. We work with a lot of companies. I don't see shit like that very often.
I agree.
It's usually pulling teeth to get something like that to happen, and this one was not hard at all. It took me like, seriously, the dumpsters showed up, and it was so fast. I'm like, I'm not sure that's our guys, because I heard tomorrow maybe. Mm-hmm. And I called the lady, and she was like, no, that's us. I just told him to hurry up. I'm like, all right, cool, man, thanks. So shout out to Waste Management. Obviously.
That's awesome. Yeah, usually what I've seen is it's usually the companies that have the least to give that try to give the most. It's usually the small businesses.
I wonder what that is. Is that perspective? You know what I mean? Like when you're struggling, I feel like it's easier to contextualize the need, maybe.
I think that's probably right. I think they can see themselves in it. Oftentimes they're local. I think, corporations are traditionally risk managers. Everything is a risk. What if we give here, do we have to give there? What if something goes wrong? What if somebody gets hurt? Like they they go through a process of risk management, similar to, you know, the way the government is not very quick.
Yeah.
You know,
They're definitely risk averse.
Yeah.
Right. Which is like, I don't know. We've done stuff legislatively to address that issue over the years. There are something called Good Samaritan laws, which I'm sure you're familiar with. If you're walking down the street and somebody gets hit by a car and you try to help them, but through no fault of your own or even through incompetence, maybe the situation gets worse. You can't be sued for trying to help somebody, right? That kind of protection doesn't really exist for corporations.
That's right.
Certainly not for the government, right? Unless you're, well, not anymore, but the DOD used to have that, the Farris Doctrine. We knocked that down a couple of years ago, but Natalie Quam, she's a fucking maniac. I don't know if you know her or not.
I don't.
You know Richard Stayskull? He was the guy with cancer.
Yeah.
That was his attorney, Natalie. Okay. And then she was the Guillen family's attorney as well. Huh. She kind of specializes in telling the DOD to go fuck itself. Which is an interesting job to have, to be honest. But
that is an interesting job.
Yeah. It's the DOD kind of has had some protections. They still have procedural protections because it's notoriously difficult to get through their court system. But it's risk aversion is the wrong answer. Risk there's 4 different types of risk mitigation. Smoothing and fucking whatever, right? There's like, you can read this in FEMA handbooks. We're not doing a fucking FEMA show today, but you know, spreading, smoothing, you can, there's a lot of ways to handle risk. Mitigation is one of them, but just to avoid it altogether it just doesn't work, right? Like there's no version of that in any vertical that'll ever work effectively. All it does is artificially cap anything you're doing, right?
Yeah, and I think what you see is larger corporations have a tendency to, you know, send aid through something, through an organization,
like Red Cross or whatever,
like Red Cross, somebody that,
and no fucking shame in that, obviously, right? Because you want to validate that the organization is real, and
100%.
And this new decentralized world. And this is how it's been happening over and over. And every event that happens, whether it's here or overseas somewhere, something fucked up happens, the government bungles it, and this regular people show up and fix it, right?
Over and over again.
Which is like, why do we have a federal government in the first place? And I'm not saying that tongue-in-cheek. I'm serious. Get rid of it. It's completely pointless in its current form. But anyways,
I think
it probably as a corporation is difficult to look at that landscape and be like, man, because there are a lot of fucking dumb grifters. And some people aren't intentional grifters. They're just stupid.
They're just stupid.
You know what I mean? They raise a bunch of money, and then it's just like, fucking, we're gonna, like, oh boy, you're getting real close here.
You know, we've seen a lot of different groups overseas and, you know, and here, and there are some very good ones. There are some groups that make a huge difference. You know, you see Samaritan's Purse, you know, and Mercury One. Like, those guys are everywhere, and they do great work. You know, people like that. And then there are people where,
and Rubicon too. They've been doing for like 15 years now. They've been doing shit.
I mean, there's a ton. I wasn't limiting it to those.
Well, I was just thinking, you know, of ones that people would know. But yeah, there's a bunch.
But you know, there are people that absolutely are after some kind of, you know, whether it's attention or it's money or it's whatever. And they do tend to cause problems. I try to be very gracious with anybody that I get the impression is really trying to do good, even if they're not, you know, completely on point, because our community has a tendency to beat the crap out of itself, you know, and so it's like, and I've seen it about things that we've done where it's like, you know, Tim Kennedy's only doing that for, you know, grift or for attention or whatever. Like, Tim doesn't need attention.
No, Tim is famous. He doesn't need more attention.
He doesn't need any of this stuff.
It's like, here's for anybody that actually believes that, come to SHOT Show one time and just go to one of Tim's events and look at the line out the door. All he needs to do for attention is show up at a random 511, and people will start coming there like he's the goddamn Field of Dreams or something.
You know, even if we're walking down the street in random places, there's always somebody walking up to him. So that's the thing is, you know, but I take it personally, you know, the same way that I would take it personally, you know, when people, you know, talk about, you know, you talk about Ross, talk about Jared, whatever. But, you know, I've been there, you know, you know, when Tim got back from, you know, when he finally landed back in UAE, you know, he had a fairly emotional breakdown, you know, and like that's, you know, that's for him to share, but, you know, that took a heavy toll. Or it took a heavy toll on all of us, but it, you know, took a heavy toll on him, on Sean G, on Sea Spray. Like those guys were not doing well because of what they had just endured. And then it's like, yeah, he did it to get attention. Like it pisses me off. It's like, man, nobody wants that attention. Like that's not, and oftentimes what people don't understand is when he is out doing Fox or he's doing whatever show, it's to raise money to help people.
Yeah.
Like he's not making money off of this stuff.
Yeah, I don't know how people think the news works.
Yeah.
Like I write for Newsweek and the New York Post, and I mean they offer me a very small amount of money. I'm like, nah, I'm good, man. That's not even worth doing the paperwork for, to be honest. I don't want to. I'm gonna forget this come tax time, and I really don't want to get audited. So you just keep your fucking money, not even an in kind. I don't want any paperwork. Just fucking take the words. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Certainly not getting paid to go on people's shows and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's silly. But you know, there's one of these. One of the points here is that if you can figure out what motivates different people, you can be a really good top-level manager. You know what I mean? And I think even in selecting political candidates and stuff like that, if you can really understand what motivates somebody, you can really get to the nitty-gritty on their first principles, right? Like, I don't think anybody that thinks they should or could be president of the U.S. has an ego. Everybody's got an ego, but somebody that believes that has a massive
ego. You have to think.
So what is it that it feeds that ego, right? For certain, and I like to look to antiquity because it was absent all this media and marketing and fluff versus disinformation, right? Not that they weren't propagandizing back then, but
it was different.
You can read a little bit more clearly because most of the contextual information is from their own mouths, right? And Caesar wanted to restore the Roman Empire, right? Because he hated the Senate, because they were all old, corrupt dudes that were creating laws that only benefited themselves.
Yep.
And he was a soldier. He was born in the purple, but he went out to be a soldier for 30 years, right? Chased down fucking Spartacus, right? With his mentor there, that they eventually became part of the first triumvirate together. But you know, what motivated him was conservatism, essentially, right? He was a conservative. He wanted to conserve what Rome was.
Sure.
You know what I mean? That's what conservatism really is. It's not being a Republican or whatever, but and then obviously the guys who came after just wanted to maintain their own power, and it was very obvious that was the case. And then you see his nephew, who became Augustus, was very much the same way. Like, very ego-driven man, but his ego was directly tied to making the Roman Republic the best version of itself that it could be,
Yeah,
right?
and he thought he could deliver that.
And he did. Yeah. He delivered the Pax Romana, right? Like the longest period of peace ever. Now, his dynasty didn't go well, frankly. After him, it kind of fucking sucked. It was bad. But, you know, he delivered, and I think that's what you should be looking for. What is it that motivates this person? You know what I mean? Forget about the name, forget about the political party. You can even, in a lot of ways, look past some of the policy stuff and try to figure out what it is that motivates this person. Now, the policy stuff and how it changes over time will give you some indication of who that human being is,
Sure.
right?
Who do you look at as somebody that is upholding principles that you think are, valuable to conserving the Union?
You mean in politics?
Yeah.
Thomas Massey.
Okay. What is it about him that you think is so important?
He actively tries to limit and shrink the size of the federal government. For me, that's the most important thing.
And you think that's real, not performative?
I know.
I'm not going after anybody.
No, yeah, for sure it's real. Yeah. No, he believes it in his bones. You know what I mean? He also happens to be the smartest man in Congress. Well, I don't think anybody else has advanced degrees from MIT in Congress. Maybe they do, but
I'm sure there's somebody, but yeah.
He's the only one I'm aware of. There's plenty of Harvard degrees, not a lot of MIT degrees.
I've always felt that was a more impressive degree.
I think the world believes that as well, especially these days after the nonsense that's been going on there lately. But yeah, he like the way he votes ethically. He never compromises. That's one of my favorite quotes ever. It's from the the Watchmen comics back in the day. Never compromise, even in the face of Armageddon. It's like if you really believe something, you'll never compromise on it. If it's one of your core principles, like not harming children, for example, right? Like you have to take it to the extreme sometimes. And he lives that life. He votes that way. He calls people out. He doesn't fucking coddle anybody on his own side. If you're right, you're right, and if you're wrong, you're wrong. And that's what a principle really is, right?
How concerned are you right now? The reason I say that is I vacillate between feeling like this is the worst kind of, these are the worst options we've had. This is like the least positive, political situation we've had across the board, to then also saying, well, like, let me not have, a bias towards recency. The 60s, politicians were getting murked left and right.
In the 70s, we were this close to a depression.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like so close. And Vietnam too, right?
Yep.
So it's like it was
and then
60s and 70s were probably worse than things are right now.
And then I grew up with the constant threat of nuclear winter. I mean, like, so I try not to think, but I do think there is a general lack of respect. And I don't necessarily even care about the lack of respect amongst politicians, but amongst the citizenry. And I am concerned about that. Like, where are you on that? Like, how?
Well, we don't respect each other because our leaders don't respect each other. That's how it works, right? Like imagine yourself at a battalion meeting and your colonel is talking to your fucking sergeant major like he's some kind of asshole. You know what I mean? At any rank, you're going to be like, okay, something's wrong here. This is not how we do business. This is not healthy, right? Regardless of what our differences of opinion might be, we can't do that. Now, I think it's coming to a head now because of the vitriol for Trump, and I think the vitriol for Trump is warranted if you consider the position these people are in, and the position they're in is the same old position. It's that the aristocracy will protect itself before it'll protect any political principle or policy position or even individual.
Yeah,
they will always protect the institution first, right? And this is true. This isn't about America. This has always been true.
Human nature,
right? Yep. Like the smartest pleb in the world wasn't walking into the Roman Senate to make his point. He'd get his head cut off. You know what I mean? Yep. And everybody, regardless if they agreed with him or not, would fucking sit there and watch and do nothing to stop it. That's the same now as it always was. And Trump represents a threat to that. It represents a threat to the way things have always been done, which is always a problem, whether it's industry or the military or politics. So when I'm like, people ask me about voting for Trump, why they should, because and these are typically people that are conservative anyways. They were going to vote for him. They're just curious. You can talk about immigration and inflation and crime and the economy and stupid foreign policy decisions and just weakness in general, which is not appropriate for the president. It's not appropriate. All that bullshit, but that's what everybody's talking. I think going back to the institutional level is a lot more important to discuss and also more telling about why you should vote which way, right? And I think forget it, not just in this election, but in any election. So I'm going to vote for Trump because all the people who've been driving this country into the ground for 60 years now, the people that killed our fucking president, JFK, and the people who are responsible for 60 years of foreign policy blunder after another, who and continue to appeal to authority, to their own foreign policy experience, even though it's horrible. It's like Shaq shot a lot of free throws, but I'm not going to him for free throw advice.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Just because he did it a lot doesn't mean he's good at it. And the simple fact is that Trump ended the cycle of war during even this brief 4-year term, right? Where he only really governed for about 18 to 24 months. I just think, let me go back. So all systems of government eventually become an engine to extract labor and wealth from the population, right? If they're left unchecked, which is why in their infinite wisdom, our founders decided to go with a federalist republic, right?
Yep.
Decentralization of power from the bottom up. For the first time in human history, we codified that in the 9th and 10th Amendments. The founders knew then, when there were only 3 million of us, even then, that nothing would scale. None of this shit's ever going to scale. You're never going to have people who are culturally and geographically disparate agree on everything all the time.
That's right.
And why should you expect that to be the case? So it worked a little while. And then, you know, as governments do, they find reasons to start taxing people. And it becomes mission creep. You go from collecting taxes from some possibly noble venture, who knows, right? Building railroads in the interstate highway system, that's probably a good thing. Defeating the Nazis, probably a good thing, right? But now we're paying 40% taxes. During World War II, actually, the peak was 91%.
Yep.
Right, for the highest earners.
Yeah.
Just to be clear. But, you know, this stuff, anytime you build more government, you're essentially, think of it as building a prison from the inside out. You know what I mean? Like, you're giving people power over you, and why should you?
Why should you? Yeah.
Now, it isn't just a Republican or Democrat issue, and not in any way, right? It's all of these authoritarian aristocrats. Since Reagan, we've deregulated a lot of stuff, which is good and in principle. But then we started choosing sides about which industries were going to be able to change and how quickly. And Clinton doubled down on this. So the military industrial complex, the suppliers of the Department of Defense, went from, and 80% of all of our products came from 100 companies when Clinton took office. By the time, by 2014 under Obama, it was 5 companies. 5. Halliburton, KBR is the biggest. Yep. And then the other ones are very highly specialized. Yep. General Dynamics, Boeing, Lockheed, right? They're they provide one or a couple of specific products with no competition for decades at a time. Bush doubled down on that, allowing Whirlpool to acquire Maytag, and then they had a 75% market share of home appliances. 75%.
Yeah. No, it's insane.
Right? And then we went from 6 to 4 mobile phone companies. We went from 20 to 4 airlines during that same time period. 2 of the biggest phone companies, by the way, control 70% of the market. So, you know, I think...
yeah, the power is definitely now in the hands of multinational corporations.
It's a big problem.
You see it more and more. Policy across all nations are influenced by these mega companies. And then you have to ask yourself, you know, how much farther away is power from the people as a result of these conglomerates?
Yeah, I mean, it's, and think about some of the, aside from what's happening in the economy, we see this. The reason wages are flat and costs are up is because there's no competition. This is basic economics, right? Sure. Like we're not splitting the fucking atom here.
Yeah.
And then, you know, they hate him for trying to undo the mess they've made, which is that they did it. This is on purpose, so that their friends can get richer and richer and richer with no competition, and then spend money on their political campaigns to keep them in power. Think about the trajectory of this. Reagan began it, deregulating everything but choosing winners, and that goes on for 30 years. And then Citizens United happens in 2010.
Which is...
And it allows unlimited spending from these multinational corporations on politics. And then in 2011, the Democrats have a supermajority in both houses and the presidency. They passed the Affordable Care Act. They didn't do a goddamn thing to stop this, right? Because it was planned the entire time, always was, right? So he wants to undo that. He wants to turn off the faucet in two ways. One is to do real deregulation and then bring manufacturing and all kinds of stuff back into the country where they can be monitored and people, American people, will actually make and then keep more of their own money. And then the second part, as I mentioned before, he was breaking the war cycle. So
one of the things that people don't realize is that depending on who you ask, which study you look at, 80 to 95% of all new jobs come from small business. Mm-hmm. Growth in labor comes from entrepreneurship. It does not come from large corporations because large corporations are always incentivized to cut costs, cut labor. Labor is almost always the biggest cost structure in any large business. And so, as we're looking at, AI, automation, all these things, these mega corporations, which we've given, like you said, in some cases, 70, 80% of our business, are actually going to reduce labor and there will be fewer jobs. But yet we keep pouring money and tax incentives and the like into companies that actually, destroy Main Street, so to speak. Companies that are building in China, that are building, overseas. In the old days, when you're building in America, like if you have a corner store, if you're running a hardware store, you're buying hammers from the dude down the street, or maybe the state over even.
I mean, the data on that is that a dollar spent at a local store multiplies 7 to 11 times before it leaves the local economy, typically.
Yep. Yeah.
Which is, just think about that.
Vice, I bought it on Amazon for $1, and that's it. We don't see that again.
Yeah. Even if you're buying it from a mom and pop vendor, you're still giving 30% of that money to Amazon, which is a multinational corporation, So the economic side is very obviously trending in one direction. More monopolies, duopolies, oligopolies, and stagnant wages and rising costs. And now then there's the inflation part where we're printing money. Everybody knows about that. But I think the chain of war that we've been in since the 1950s really is something that people need to think about more. So our State Department and CIA got involved in Iran, overthrew their government, put in a fucking crazy dictator because he was going to let us keep our oil deal, right? Which is fucking nuts. And to fight Iran, because they became a problem later, we started funding Saddam Hussein. Gave him chemical weapons, as a matter of fact. 1983, the same year that on the anniversary today of the Beirut fucking Marine Corps bombings, we started funding Saddam Hussein. Well, then we start running this little program where we're funding both sides because we need money, right? And as a result of that, we have to fund Shia militias inside of Iraq called Jaish al-Mahdi, or the Mahdi Army, that is under the control of Muqtada al-Sadr in Sadr City. It used to be Saddam City, now it's Sadr City. And before him, his father. But then to fight Jaish al-Mahdi, we created something called the Sons of Iraq in 2006 and 2007. I was there for that. We were setting these dudes up on checkpoints and going in and checking on them every day for months at a time. Well, they became ISIS, right? And then we spent years rooting ISIS out all in countries all over the Middle East, right? Trump has broken this cycle. He broke it by going to the source, by going to Iran and saying, you're not getting any of your money, and if you even look at us, we're going to fuck you up. Strength matters. That's the whole point of being the president. That is why they fucking hate Trump, because he's taking, look, and again, I say it's a reasonable position from their perspective, and it is, because he doesn't need their money. He doesn't need Citizens United.
Sure.
He doesn't need their war because he's not getting money from their defense contractors. He doesn't want their wars. He doesn't want to play their games, so they hate him. They have to convince you that he's evil, that he's dangerous, that he's literal Hitler. They have to convince you that it's a threat to democracy, whatever the fuck that means, right? I mean, it's maddeningly stupid and transparent, and the reality is that the people who've ruined this country, who've taken everything from us via debt and the Patriot Act and these wars and all this stupid bullshit, who have generally just mismanaged the country for decades, for 4 generations now, they're trying to use emotional bait and manipulation to have people vote against their own best interests. We've seen what he did for 4 years. The Abraham Accords alone should have landed him a Nobel Peace Prize. It is one of the most incredible, like, collaborative efforts in the history of human beings to take. Like, I can't think of anybody that hates each other more than the Jews and Muslims, or Israel and Muslims necessarily, especially in that region. And to have 5 of the richest Muslim countries targeted them specifically for that: the Emirates, Bahrain, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, etc., Jordan, to have them all sign on to peace deals, and not just peace deals, but protective deals.
That was a huge moment,
right? That would have been like in the 1970s if the U.S. president had negotiated a peace deal between the IRA and the fucking British government, man. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That would have been an immediate Nobel Peace Prize. So you're asking people to believe shit that they can see isn't true. And I think
and now you're seeing people almost walk that back a little bit.
They're waking up a little bit now, which is a very interesting thing to see, to be honest. Like, I'll criticize Trump when he deserves it. On the COVID stuff, he deserved it.
He deserves it on a number of things.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. So, like, that's what I mean when I say you have to reduce this stuff down to first principles. If you can't have the conversation we just had and explain why, I'm not paying attention to all this fake racist horse shit that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Let's talk about motivation and results.
Say, he is often taken out of context. And listen,
some of it is his fault just because he's ineloquent with the way he speaks.
He is not an eloquent speaker.
You know what I mean? He just kind of riffs a lot. So I mean, whatever. But
I do think, though, a viable concern is, there is a lot of belief that, if he is reelected, he's going to go after basically anybody that stood against him at any point, and almost have a aggressive version of what happened to him, where people's lives are going to be ruined and whatnot. And I don't think that's good for the country. I think there is a lot of people that are worried about that kind of a thing.
Like, what do you mean? What do they think he's going to do exactly? Like, put them in prison? Because Biden was on at a campaign event yesterday saying we need to lock him up.
Yeah,
Trump.
Listen,
right?
I think that the way that he's been treated is inappropriate. I think that New York, the way that case has gone down is obviously biased, and obviously there's.
So it's not normal for the Department of Justice to send one of their prosecutors to a city DA's office.
Yeah, it is
okay,
not.
cool.
Yeah, so all of that is, I think, horrific. But I think there is concern that he's going to do that at another level and basically go after anybody that has spoken against him in any way and use the power of the government. I think that is when people that are not political operatives talk about their fear of Trump, it's he does have a history of being a vindictive guy. You're either on his team or you're not, and I think my big criticism of his presidency is how aggressively he went after everybody that didn't believe as he did. And so I think that's what non-political operatives, when they're talking about what are they worried about, I think that's a concern.
Yeah, I mean, it would be. There's only so many hours in the day, to be honest.
Sure.
And I think what would be appropriate is for us to remove these people from government forever, right? And try to
I'm on board, right?
I don't know what his plan is with Elon, with this government efficiency board or whatever the fuck they're calling it, but if it is to do what Twitter did and shrink the size of the government by 75%, yes, yeah. Start immediately. There's some really interesting data on this. I was talking about all of the
well, we can't keep spending like this.
No. Well, I was talking about all the fucking the deregulation and monopolies that created as a result. But another side of that is that, and this is how you know it was done on purpose. Obama was the one who let the airlines merge. They went from 20 to 4, right? And even inside of their own pockets, and anybody that flies on a regular basis knows this, each major airline, all 4 of them, have a certain part of the country, and if you're flying in that area, then you got to use them. Otherwise, it's super expensive, right?
Yep.
And what that allows, the lack of competition allows for them to nickel and dime the fuck out of you.
Oh, for sure.
Everything costs something. You're paying like fees for nothing, right?
Yeah, I've been flying, pretty extensively for years, and excuse me, prices are up.
Is there something going on with this mic? Why is it?
I think it's like falling.
Oh my God,
it's kind of falling on me.
I'm gonna have to get that fixed.
Maybe he just didn't cinch it down enough.
Yeah.
That's right. But prices are up and service is down. Like first class, I fly so much. I'm usually first class, and it's not what it used to be at all. I mean, the seats are smaller. You're not getting fed anymore. And then, if you're in Maine, I mean, some of these airlines. They even have airlines now where you stand during your flight.
Oh, really? I haven't seen that.
That's a thing now. I think it's like Ryanair is doing that, standing only.
Like a fucking train.
Like
That's
a train,
pretty funny. Boy.
But yeah, you are seeing significant decreases in competition in almost every meaningful area.
Well, it's all on purpose too. I mean, so from 2001 when Bush took office until 2014, middle Obama, we went from prosecuting 15 to 16 major antitrust suits a year to 3, including 0 in 2014, the year that Obama allowed all these airline mergers. And the other side of that, and that's one of the ways that it was all done on purpose. And the other part of it is that what we're talking about now, for every law Congress passes, unelected bureaucrats craft and publish 16 regulations. 16 to 1. That's not democracy. So even though we are not a democracy, we're a fucking constitutional republic.
Yep.
In this liberal fucking fantasy that we're in some kind of direct democracy, that ain't it. Even by your own definition, that's not a democracy.
I'll give you a perfect example of that, and this goes back to my desire for small business to thrive. And I think you probably kind of recognize this. A couple of years ago, so originally, Amazon and fought very hard to make sure that people were not taxed when they were buying, via the internet. They were the number one lobby against that. Well, then all of a sudden, you had all these small companies that were competing against them. Just like that, Amazon switched positions and they started pushing for taxation to be, taxes to be pulled from every state. The second that became a thing, if you were a company, I want to say if you sold more than $1 million online, which to people that aren't in business, that sounds like a lot.
Yeah.
It actually is not. You suddenly had to go from just collecting taxes in your own state to collecting taxes in 50 states and filing, quarterly or potentially even monthly tax payments to those states.
Yeah.
Now, you can do it yourself manually, but that's a full-time job, or you can pay for a service that does it, which, I want to say back when I ran Ranger Up, I think it was like $60,000 a year, which again, doesn't sound like a lot, but that is a lot of money. That is a person that you could have hired.
I mean, that's your net revenue. Typically, anything you spend outside of the normal purview of business is cutting into your profit, which is the point of business.
The point of business. So all of a sudden, you have, you are either in violation of federal law, you're doing this yourself to the best of your ability, or you're making less. For Amazon, it's not hard at all for them to do this.
Well, that's
a
the
simple
strategy,
system.
though. That's what's that's the other part, and I didn't mention it so far, so thanks for bringing it up, but that's the final piece of this whole pie. Deregulation and choosing sides, and one of the ways they do that is through corporate lobbyists saying, and there's a book called The Myth of Capitalism, which is a really good book. It's on Eric Prince's reading list, so everybody should read it, I guess. But the book uses the development of the leukemia treatment, which essentially that's where we got chemotherapy from originally, was leukemia, child leukemia, I think in the 1950s. A guy was researching it, but he figured out what he needed to do was develop a treatment that was deadly enough to kill cancer, but not so deadly that it kills the human host. And that is what corporate lobbyists in America do now. They want to create regulations that either raise the barrier to entry beyond the level that a
normal
small
person
business can compete
that's
in,
right.
Or they want to make it more difficult for them to scale past a certain point, so the easiest solution for them is to sell to the larger company, right?
Yep.
And that is, all of that is effectively creating monopolies and duopolies and oligopolies, right? And it's all been done on purpose. It's if you follow the way that Warren Buffett trades, for example, he only invests in companies that only have a maximum of one competitor, and he tries to find just one.
Sure.
And smart, I guess, for investments. The problem is that he kind of led to this. Well, one, he was heavily invested in all 4 airlines, right, and deeply involved in that legislation to let them fucking start merging the 20 airlines. So yeah, I'm glad he's given away half his wealth or whatever, but he's a piece of shit. He fucked America over big time, and he but he like popularized something called horizontal trading, which is where you're a Vanguard or BlackRock or a State Street, and you own X percent of this company that builds cars, right? So what am I going to do? I'm going to go buy majority shares in the muffler company that supports them and the tire company that supports them, and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, so you own
and
the
now
whole
I
chain.
can control the pricing for that whole fucking structure.
Supply chain, yep.
And absent that competition, wages go down, prices go up, always, right? And that's what we're seeing right now. So I hate to break it to the conservatives out there, but it's not true that corporations haven't been greedy. The part that the left won't mention is that they were complicit in it. The Republicans and Democrats voted because of lobbyists funding their campaigns to help these people monopolize.
Yeah.
So they want you to hate billionaires and whatever the fuck. But billionaires' job is to make money.
That's right.
It was the politicians we elected job to stop them from victimizing us in the process. And not only did they not stop them from victimizing us, but they participated in the goddamn event.
Well, politicians continue to get rich.
Yeah.
And I don't begrudge somebody making money off of, writing a book or something like this, but I know how long it takes to write a book or make a documentary or whatever. So I'm sitting here going, where do you have the time to do this with all of the challenges that the nation has? Because it's one thing for you or I, Dan, to be like, hey, you're going to run your podcast, but you're also going to launch, Hard as Fuck. You're going to, that's different because this is your life. There's no one on the hook for it but you. Same with me. But if all of us, if you elect me and you're like, Nick, Dan, you're now a senator, right? You're now a representative. You're now president. I'm not doing anything but that job.
Yeah.
I'm not sitting around trying to figure out how can I make more money. The book can come when I'm done. The documentary can come when I'm done. But when you have people that go from basically being, middle class or even below that, and 6 years later they're worth 10 million, there's no way that you did that on the up and up.
Yeah.
I mean, it's literally impossible.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the solution to that is, to be honest. I mean, the unique thing about the United States is consent of the governed. And people cloverleafed around this idea a bunch through human history, and they tried to make it work. There were the levelers back in the day. There was the serf rebellions in the early part of the 16th century. And a lot of that was tied around. So serfdom, for those that don't know, was basically slavery,
Yep.
but it was hereditary slavery, not like slavery used to be before. It was technically you weren't a slave, but you were to the individual who owned the property, but you were a slave to the property, right? You belonged to the property.
That's right.
Which is slavery with extra steps, to be honest. But not only did you belong to the property, but any children you might have for the rest of your life. Like the way it typically worked was you worked 3 or 4 days for your Lord for free. And then you got the other days of the week to work a parcel of land that didn't belong to you, that belonged to the Lord still, but you could reap the benefits from it, food or whatever it happened to be, right? And that led to a charter of rights, and this is, 300 years after the Magna Carta, basically. So a charter of rights that applied to regular people for the first time in human history. The Magna Carta only applied to the barons. You know what I mean? Like it gave landowners rights, but nobody else.
The patricians.
Yeah. And then we progress to the early 16th century, and we have these people, this serf rebellion, and then we have the levelers afterwards, who wrote in the 17th century what would become the United States Constitution, basically, right? We think that I don't know where people think it came from, but it took 400 or 500 years to develop this
of course.
Information.
Yeah.
And
they didn't dream it up in that moment. These are well-read men that had studied history, that looked at the flaws in the progression of these systems.
Yeah, if you want to look it up, it's called An Agreement of the People. That's what the levelers wrote, and that you will find pretty much all of the language you find in our Constitution. You'll find there, and there's another textbook called The Preceptor that everybody should own and read. It's the language that can be difficult because it was written in the middle part of the 18th century.
The Preceptor.
Preceptor, yeah.
Preceptor.
Yeah.
Preceptor.
Yeah. And it was the textbook for government back then. You will find large sections, like the preamble to the Constitution is basically not word for word, but it is a paraphrasing of a paragraph inside of the Preceptor, and it kind of catalogs this journey we went on from all the way, even before the Magna Carta, like back to the Roman period, but the rights of man and how they developed over time, and a big part of it is that we wanted America to be this idea that individual liberty and personal entrepreneurship is the ultimate inoculation to tyrannical bullshit. If I can own my own property and work it to my own benefit, and everybody else is doing that as well or has the opportunity to, then nothing can really stop us. And that has proved true even until now.
Yep.
It's proved true. The reason, certainly the Second Amendment helps. There's a rifle right here. Certainly the Second Amendment helps with that. But guns don't, like a lot of countries have guns and not rights.
That's right.
Somalia's got fucking guns.
Yeah.
They don't have any rights. It is the intellectual exercise over time that afforded this to us just as much as it is the wars or the constant threat of rebellion, right? It's really important.
Do you think, so I wrestle with this a lot. I don't know if it's just because I'm getting older, but I do feel like, and I think it's tied to the advent of Google and now ChatGPT, but I feel like there are fewer and fewer people that are truly educated. So you're extremely well read. That's obvious from our conversations. I always think that, when I'm reading something, it takes me days to read a book. And during that period of time, even while I'm ingesting it, I'm wrestling with these ideas, and then I'm thinking about the ideas when I put the book down, and it is a deeper knowledge than you're going to get Googling a fact or reading an article. But then now I almost think like we've lost even another step of thinking, which is, my little brother, I say little brother, he's like 6'1", 6'2", but my little brother is a history teacher, and he forces his kids now to write in class, because if they don't physically write in class, most of them are going to just enter into ChatGPT, like, hey, write an essay on this, and then maybe they tweak it a little bit. But the exercise of forming cogent thoughts, even if you're going to rely on ChatGPT a lot, I think is really important to learning how to think, not just what you think or what the facts are. And I worry that, as you're talking about some of these complex ideas, you're really talking about the foundation of our society. How do you get that across to people that maybe don't want to put in work?
Yeah, I mean, that's tough. Look, you can lead a horse to water, right? I think you have to explain why something works the way it does before you can get somebody to engage in that process. Think of it as like a personal trainer telling you why you need full range of motion on something. You've been doing a certain workout the wrong way your whole fucking life, and all of a sudden he shows you the right way. And you have to believe it because the results aren't immediate. You know what I mean? You got to convince that person that this is the way things work. And the best way to convince somebody that this is the way things work is to show them historical examples of it, right? And also, I guess you might say, like contextual metaphors. So one of the ways that I described is like things take time, right? There's physical laws that apply to that you can kind of point out to people. And look, you got to meet people where they are intellectually. Not to say that people are stupid, but if they don't understand a complete concept, using it as a metaphor is not doing anything for you.
Sure.
All you've done was waste your oxygen. Since we're in Texas, I'll use this metaphor. I'm sure you've heard the phrase low and slow when it comes to barbecue, right? Mm-hmm. There's a reason. There's a physical law of the universe, right, that governs that principle.
Yep.
And it is that too much heat will fuck up the meat. It'll fuck up the connective tissue, right?
Yep.
It hardens it instead of breaks it down.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of examples of this. I mean, you think about manipulating metal or different other types of compounds like that. You have to do it at a certain... Cooking at its core is time and temperature, right? That's really what it is.
Sure.
Sometimes if you're doing other stuff, it's pressure as well. But time, temperature, and let's just say pressure for the sake of this argument. There is a...
PV equals nRT. I mean, that's...
Yeah. So it's like explaining to somebody why the mechanics of how something works, especially for dudes. I don't know about women, to be honest. Dudes care deeply about things and how they work. It's just how our brains are rigged. So when you're talking to men, you've got to show them the process, right?
Yes.
From a 30,000 foot view, and then start zooming in after that. So that's why when I talk to people, when I debate somebody, or I'm talking to somebody who is perhaps on the other side of an issue than me, I don't want to talk about the specific policy. I want to talk about why that policy is important. The Second Amendment, for example, right, is a really good example. And this is one that I can use a reference from the right. Very frequently, when people get tuned up about it, they'll just repeat the phrase "shall not infringe" over and over. Like, all right, cool.
It doesn't help. It doesn't help with anything.
I agree with that sentiment.
Yep.
But if you can't explain to me why that's the case,
that's right,
without saying "fuck the government" or whatever, then you're not saying anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
And worse, you're not convincing anybody.
Yes.
Coalition building is a very important part of socialization and of building an epistemology in a culture. Like these are things that we all agree upon, and here's the reason why. The reason that a math teacher asks you to show your work isn't to be a dick and make you do work for no reason. It's just find the flaw if you fuck up.
If you mess
here's
up.
where you messed up.
Yeah, that's right.
Now you're right? So with the Second Amendment, you go, people take it to different wars or rebellions or whatever. Fuck all that. Go to The Rights of Man by John Locke. And understand that the most important right you have is property rights, and the most important property you have is your person. And you have the right, the natural right, not conferred to you by the state or any organization or any of that bullshit or another person, a natural right to defend your property, right, against anybody. And the ultimate property being yourself, you have two inherent rights involved right there. The first one is to think whatever the fuck you want.
Yep.
And that's what makes censorship so not wrong, but evil, right?
I'm incredibly worried about, Harris, talking about, important limitations on the First Amendment, especially when you juxtapose it with what's happening in the UK right now.
Yeah, a teacher got arrested this weekend for not calling somebody by their pronouns.
Yeah, I mean,
a primary school teacher. Like, fuck off, dude.
Now, like, you can certainly argue somebody's a dick for saying whatever. Like, you call somebody the N-word, you're a dick. You're an asshole. Like, I
prefer to know who the dicks are.
I'd rather know who the dicks are.
I don't want to talk to that guy.
And we can all adjust accordingly.
Yeah.
And we can use our words to defeat their words. But
you can't defeat ideas by force.
You cannot. And moreover, the people that end up deciding what is acceptable tend to be people that I really don't want to be deciding who's acceptable.
The most offended, right? You should find the least offended. We should have Bill Burr and Theo Vaughn should be in charge of censorship.
That's right.
If you offend them, then maybe we can have a conversation.
Yeah.
Or me. If you can offend me, then maybe we can have a conversation.
Yeah.
But if you don't reach some kind of threshold like that, but back to that is a fundamental right, because the reason that it's so important, again, you got to take this back to first principles, not just fuck the government, you can't tell me what to do. The reason it is so fucking important is that speech is thought, and controlling speech is controlling thought, and that is the most evil thing you can do in society, right? Yep. That is the most evil thing you can do, because it persists over generations. You can murder a bunch of people, and that's a single event, but if you control thought inside of an entire culture, now you've created damage that persists for decades. And that is your ultimate property right, is the ability to think and say what you want. And somebody offending that is a fucking problem, right?
Yes.
And again, take it to the Second Amendment, it becomes a lot more obvious now why it's important after you have that discussion. It's important because I need the right to defend myself against any oncomer, to include the government, right? It's in our founding documents. It's written right there in black and white.
And we keep losing that. When people talk about the Second Amendment being about hunting, I'm like, man, have you not read the Federalist Papers? Have you not read anything?
Yeah, it's nonsense.
It is clearly, about self-preservation against a tyrannical government.
Yeah. But if you don't know who John Locke is, you'll never understand that.
Sure.
You'll never understand. You have to understand the knowledge that props up that idea, right? If you don't, then you're just talking, man.
There's also this belief that we somehow have outgrown, the entirety of human history. Like people really think we are evolved.
People are always a prisoner of their times. Like the Middle Ages, they didn't think they were in the Middle Ages. They didn't think they were in the middle of anything. That was their life. Right?
That's right. That was their lives, And, and I know, having been in a number of places where there are civil wars, where things have gone south, where, we are fancy monkeys. Like when things go bad, it becomes about who has the resources, who has food, who has water, who has protection, who has shelter. And people are then willing to do horrific things to each other. It can happen anywhere. It can definitely happen here.
Sure, yeah. And worse than that is a universal principle throughout all of nature. Forget about human beings.
Yeah,
that's universal. But the thing that's unique about human beings is that we have the upper mammalian communal brain, which allows for that instinct to be manipulated very easily.
That's right.
All I have to do is convince you that there's a resource scarcity. And now you'll go attack that guy for me, right? Yeah. Even if it's not necessary. And that's something that you have to be ever vigilant about. Again, the idea that we should trust government is a logical fallacy of appeal to authority. Just because they're there in that position doesn't mean we should trust them. That's nonsense.
Over again. Not that you should never trust it, but you should certainly question.
I mean, you should monitor it the same way I don't trust my car just to be in working condition all the time. Yeah. I look at the tires, and if they look fucked up, I assume they're fucked up and I fix them. You know what I mean? We don't operate this way in any other facet of our lives, ever. except for when it comes to giving some other human being or group power over you, which is insane to me.
is insane.
Right? But it is because, you know, it's easier to do that. And that's just the case. So, and maybe that will always be the case, that more people fall into that trap. So the fact that, for any of you out there, that the fact that you're aware of that makes you inherently a leader, because other people aren't, or they refuse to be. Which, you know, you don't have to go run for politics or join the military or do anything that's an official leadership position. You lead with every action you take. You know, it's, you know what I've noticed over the years is that I don't even have to say stuff much anymore. All I have to do is not aggressively, but overtly do the right thing in front of people, and they will start doing the right thing.
100%.
Dude's not like standing between his wife and traffic, and I do it. And then you know what I'll notice after one or two times? He's doing it all the time now.
Yep.
It didn't make him a bad person that he wasn't doing it. He just didn't have an example to follow. Now
That's
he
right.
does, right? And that's your fucking job.
It's
as
one
a
of
man.
one of the reasons I love coaching. You know, I've been coaching wrestling, I mean, almost my entire adult life. And I love the sport, but it's the ability to influence kids towards good, good habits, discipline, hard work, respect.
And you're doing them a favor.
That's right.
Not because of the outcome, by the way.
That's right. I don't care if they're good wrestlers.
Like, challenging somebody to be better is great, but it's the process of trying to make yourself better that makes your life better. Forget about regardless of the accomplishment.
That's right.
Maybe you work hard as fuck your whole life and you never really get to where you wanted to go, but I guarantee you your life is better, and you are a better person for the project. We need that. We're biologically programmed for it. Everybody's, oh man, this whole fucking postmodernist bullshit from, known pedophile Michel Foucault has completely, pardon the phrase, but butt-fucked our culture. It's like we started thinking about things in ephemeral terms when there are direct correlations between our biological programming, what we should do, and both the success and rate of contentment that we're going to have. Mm-hmm. Like Harrison Bucker got in trouble for saying, hey, for a lot of you women out there, being a mom is probably going to be the best thing you ever do in your life. Why would that be an insult to anybody?
It shouldn't be.
What a fucking weird thing to be offended by. You know what I mean? Yep. It's like, if you're a man, leading people and being a provider is probably what is going to make you feel most content. Forget about being happy. Happiness is for children.
This is a biological, necessity.
250,000 years of trial and error have led us to this point.
No.
And we think we're smarter than it. And if we think we're smarter than a 250,000, forget about the so-called experts. Like, oh, you don't trust the experts? Dude, I trust 250,000 years of trial and error. That's what I trust.
Yes.
Like, fuck off, man.
Now, if you want to go do another thing, I don't care. Like,
do what you want.
Do what
this
you want.
This is America, dude.
Do whatever
the fuck you want.
But there is this pressure. Like, men and women right now are undergoing pressures that I don't think they've had before. And I don't think people are happier.
What do you think the pressure is? And where do you think it's, my opinion on where it's coming from is just like this combination. It's like a groundswell of fucking stupidity. Like, we're bored and we're trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist. That's what I think. But where is the pressure actually coming from? You know what I mean?
I think a lot of it's generated in the media. It's generated by specific groups. But I think women feel real pressure now to be able to do everything. Like, they have to be a mom, they have to be a bad girl boss, they have to do all these things, and you even see it online. Like, there are women that are like, bragging about, hey, I made my husband his lunch, and the comments are like, why'd you make him a lunch? Why can't he make his own lunch? Why can't he, like, as if, relationship, people can't work out. There a lot of women like to take care of their significant other the same way that men like to take care of their significant other. You do that in different ways depending on what your relationship is, what your job is, what your, but everybody's got an opinion at the same time, where we have like the maximum amount of dysfunction in relationships that we've ever had. And then, you know, men are expected to be a lot more feminine. They're expected to, you know, to be these, you know, deeply, constantly feeling emotional beings, which is not normal for men.
No, I mean, you don't want emotion plus high levels of testosterone.
You don't want those two things.
That's not supposed to be the case.
Men learn early on, you have to regulate your feelings.
Yeah. Well, you're supposed to learn
or
early on.
Or we're a threat.
And if you don't learn early on, you are a threat.
You become a threat.
I mean? Like
That's right.
That's you're describing every school shooter.
You know, yes.
Like
and
literally
I know this is not popular, but when we were growing up, fights were common in grade school.
Yeah, they should be.
And it wasn't a big deal.
No. I got into fights everywhere I went. Like baseball camps in the summer. We would get into a fight, and then like half an hour later, everybody's happy again.
Yeah.
But they're never happy unless you have the fight.
I lived in Italy for years. You know, I was born in the States, but I lived in Italy for years because my dad ran a Navy GS group out in Naples, and he is Italian. Came back from Italy, moved to Massachusetts, and they were like, "Hey, I heard you speak Italian." And then I was like, "Yeah." They're like, "Say something," and I did. And then basically I got beat up for years. So like I was fighting every day, right? And you get in fights, and I'm not saying that's good. Obviously I didn't enjoy it, but you know, you learn a couple things like, hey, I might lose the fight, but I'm going to fight every day. And then that led to problem solving. Like, hey, I'm losing all these fights. I need to learn how to fight better. So I started judo. And it's like, I think you got to learn that kind of stuff. And I think that, you know, men, when they don't get to solve these kinds of, because fighting when you're a kid, this is a game. This isn't like, people aren't really trying to hurt each other. But dealing with that stress, dealing with that pressure, you know, if you and I fight, no matter what happens, at the end of it, it's done. Like, that is a very masculine thing.
Yeah.
I don't then want to shoot you because...
No, that's weak.
It's weak. It's like, hey, Dan kicked your ass. So
and if you kick my ass, then I guess I'm just going to have to go fucking fight you again later.
Yeah.
To get revenge or whatever the fuck.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think... boys don't learn how to deal with conflict, and it gets blown out of proportion with social media. You know, kids giving each other crap, whatever, and they don't know how to deal with it. And so instead of, you know, getting in a fight, or instead of joining jiu-jitsu or something and kind of dealing with the pressure, you end up with, you know, these rage killings, and you know,
I mean, it's just a symptom of us thinking we're smarter than nature, or being lazy, being lazy, lazy parenting and stuff like that. And not drugs. Just parenting, but and
you know, psychotropic drugs with kids.
Well, not the good kind. You know what I mean?
I'm not talking about your.
Well, no, I mean, there's kids doing. If children are doing mushrooms and acid and shit, I don't think that's gonna fuck them up that bad. But taking
Zoloft,
SSRIs especially, it's like you are, that's like you're freezing to death and you pour hot water on yourself, essentially, right? Like, you've temporarily done that situation a little bit of good, I guess, but it's only now you've made it worse, right? You didn't deal with the problem, so the wound gets bigger and bigger over time. And it's like, one of the things I always come back to is we think we have this idea that the mind controls the body, and that is not at all how things work.
The body controls
the mind. That's why I'd like to encourage men to do masculine shit, but not like chop firewood and join the military or anything like that. Just day to day overt signs of protection in public have a biological purpose to them. The biological purpose was to let everyone else know to fuck right off, or I will kill you where you stand.
That's right.
This is my property, and like,
this is my family.
Woman,
this is my property. This is
And you know, when you're struggling like this, like the modern male is, treat it like you're struggling in anything else. If you were fucking if you're a baseball player and your swing's fucked up, you don't go play home run derby. You don't take a nap. You don't talk about your fucking feelings. No, you break your swing down to the basic mechanics. You go back to the basics, and you relearn that. And the basics for a man is to be a provider and protector. It doesn't matter if it's your woman or somebody else's, or your kid or somebody else's. Be the kind of man that you want. Like, do the physical labor to be that man, whatever it happens to be. And I'm not talking about just like getting in shape and shit, although that's part of it, but do the physical labor. Hold doors for people. You see, you're on an airplane and some lady's trying to put her fucking bag up. You better breach kick her in the chest to stop her and do it for her. What are you thinking?
You know, there's a woman without a seat. Get up.
Any of that stuff. And I'm telling you, when you do that stuff over a long enough period of time, and I'll be honest with you, it's not going to take very long for it to happen. Not only do you start feeling better and more purposeful by yourself, but people will see a difference in you, right?
Yes. Yep.
And they will treat you differently. So all these incel people, these fucking, I don't know what they're calling them. Well, they take a couple of different forms now. One of them are the groypers, all the fucking white nationalists, dudes that have never seen a vagina in person before. But there's a bunch of different versions of these. They're all nihilists. They're pussies. They gave up. They quit, right? Because women don't respect them. People don't treat them the right way. Respect is earned through effort, period. And it's been like that through all of human history. It's why we have aggression naturally, to earn the respect of the people around us so they don't fucking intrude on us. And that, I'll bring this back to the original point. The reason I'm voting for Trump is because I cannot imagine Kamala Harris in a room with Xi Jinping or Vladimir Putin saying, hey, if you do X, we're going to do Y. I can't visualize it in my head. I know for a fact that Trump like openly threatens them in front of their staff. Like he pretty much, he told Xi Jinping, like, hey, if you do this, we're going to fuck you up. So good luck. And it's effective, man. It doesn't matter if you like it or not. And you got to understand, I know some people don't like that stuff. I know we're in a sensitive time these days, but you don't get a Pomeranian for a fucking guard dog.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to accept some of the blemishes that come with a man like Trump when you want the results that you know he can provide. That's just the way it fucking is, dude. We don't have to be best friends. We just don't. I mean, it's just not necessary. I don't want to think about the presidents we've had. It was like, oh yeah, I'd have a beer with that guy. Jimmy Carter, George Bush, fucking.
I don't know where that sentiment comes from.
Like Joe Biden. Like, yeah, I wouldn't. I think Joe Biden is probably a good dude. Probably would, like, not now he's a fucking retard, but like when he was younger, probably be fun to hang out with. Honestly, probably more fun than Trump. He doesn't even drink, and I don't like McDonald's that much. I mean, I do, but I'm not gonna eat it. Yeah, it's just.
I've never understood I want to have a beer with. I want a president that is so much smarter than me, so much more accomplished than I am, that I feel bad about myself.
Yeah.
Like, I want to be like, man, I need to like study just to like be in a room with him for 5 minutes so I don't embarrass myself.
Yeah. I mean, certainly that would be better than like the current situation.
I want a Teddy Roosevelt type. That would be.
It'd be nice, right? I mean, because the ones we're getting, like, Biden is just a career bureaucrat in a lot of ways. Obama has no experience in anything. He had a vision of the world that he wanted to see, and he tried to use force to implement it. And I don't know. Well, I guess we'll see how Trump does in a second term should he get elected. I can't imagine what might happen in a Harris presidency. I mean, that would be just an absolute shit show.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think we would definitely get attacked by a near peer, maybe not directly, but in some way.
I don't think we're that close to a direct attack.
Well, I don't mean like a military attack necessarily.
I do. I am extremely worried about.
BRICS would happen for sure.
I'm extremely worried about China. I am worried about their increased power with the BRIC economies. I'm worried about their maneuvers in the Pacific. I don't know why we continue to invest and allow our companies to invest in China, where, especially when you're talking about, the threats during COVID, where they weren't going to send, drugs that were owned by our companies that were manufactured there. I mean, like, we really should have asked ourselves questions during that period of time and adjusted accordingly. I think the one thing that the Biden administration has done that I think makes sense is, increasing infrastructure and encouraging manufacturing in the states.
Yeah.
And I don't know why.
Well, the reason that's happening is because they maintained all the Trump tariffs. That's creating that situation. Sure. 2,000 different. If Trump creates tariffs, it's going to be a $4,000 tax on the average American. It's you kept every one of them that he did, and all of his tax cuts, by the way.
I know this is a completely different topic, but and that I'm a pretty middle of the road kind of guy. I often found myself sticking up for Trump when his policies were, I thought the right policies, because there was no fairness to the coverage. And you can't, you obviously have the right media going, off the handle in that direction, but then you have the mainstream media constantly talking about how his decisions were the worst, in human history kind of thing. And it was like, where are the journalists?
Yeah.
And I know they exist. And certainly there were pieces written that were reasonable, but those pieces were never pushed. They're never pushed to the top of the website. They're never on the big morning shows. It's always the stuff that appeals to a base. And that's hard, man. I think and maybe it's on us, but the media and the media's delivery of information really has gone from news to propaganda. Yeah. At least the stories that are kind of foisted to the top.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to blame the publisher, but the consumer's got to take some responsibility at some point, right? If you keep patronizing businesses that are lying to you.
Yes.
Now, MSNBC and CNN have flatlined. They are in big trouble. Like sub 1 million on pretty much all their shows, except for I think Maddow is the only one that's carrying more than 1 million on a regular basis.
Wow. I didn't realize it was that bad.
Yeah. I think the top show on CNN is like 800,000 now, which is that they're on the trajectory that Comedy Central was on. And why they are basically folding as a network now. I think they sold to HBO, actually. Somebody else owns them now. It's...
800,000, that's like...
No. That's, it's like a week worth of Drinking Bros, basically.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, cool. Anyways, the power is... the governing documents of this country give the power to people. And if that power erodes, it's because we're not using it. It's atrophy. That's what it is, right? So
you just kind of sparked a thought. Do you anticipate that as that power shifts, that there's going to be a point where the government comes in and tries to regulate podcasts?
They can fucking try. They're going to have to come with an armed army to stop me from saying what I want to say. Just to be clear, and I think there's quite a few others like that.
I think everybody knows your position, but I'm asking: do you see that? Do you think that that's a possibility in the future, or do you think they're going to stay out of that realm?
Well, here's the conundrum they find themselves in. That would be a Section 2, since we publish over the internet. That would be a Section 230 complaint, and they would have to go after the individual publishers. But when they open that can of worms, it's all over for them, right? They lose. They've been protecting 230 for 10 years now. It's not going to happen, no. And if it does. Like maybe somebody tries it, but I don't think you can get lobbyists from Meta would shut that down immediately. And it has technically nothing to do with podcasts, but they wouldn't be able to make one rule without the other.
That's
you know
right.
what I mean?
Yeah. 100%.
So they like Meta would stop that. As much as I hate to admit it, Zuckerberg probably is on our side in that regard. Actually, he's kind of coming around now.
Honest to God, jiu-jitsu is the best thing that ever happened to Zuckerberg. It's
a little bit of struggle.
All of a sudden, he's
a little bit of physical
around.
Struggle, yeah.
He's around
dudes,
getting
his ass kicked by
masculine people.
He's on fucking TRT now.
I'm sure he is. Yeah.
Which he should be. Most men should be, actually. Anyways, we got to get out of here. I got to do sports. Tell everybody where they can find you, and tell them where they can find. Well, when's the actual? I know the premiere's tomorrow, but when's the show actually go live?
8 November.
Okay.
Office Joe is going to be live on iTunes /Apple TV. Amazon Prime and Google Play.
Sweet.
And we didn't talk about what it is or anything, but it's a funny
Everybody
show.
knows here what it is already because we've been talking about it for months.
It's a funny show, and you guys will enjoy it.
It's the Office, but from the demented minds of you and others.
And Tim Kennedy went method and gained 500 pounds for the role.
Yeah, he went. What's that dude's name? Glick. Jiminy Glick or some bullshit.
Glick,
yeah. Jared's in it.
Austin Von Letkeman.
What's his name on
Mandatory Fun
Day? That's how everybody knows him. A lot of cool guys in it. It'll be fun.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks for coming, man.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
Yep. Thank you all for listening. This has been Citizen.